Today, Kay Becker is speaking with Shane Bishop, a councilor from 2005 to becoming President of the ABBA from 2013 to 2016. This interview is brought to you by the Australian Brahman Breeders Association in recognition of the 75th year since the formation of the association on the 7th of October 1946. The association and the breed continues to thrive and grow, and many of those stories, past and present, should be recorded for future generations to enjoy.
Today, my guest is Shane Bishop. For anyone who's been involved in the cattle industry, certainly in southeast Queensland, the name Bishop is no stranger. Shane and his family have been long involved in the Brahman industry, but today he's going to tell us about the story of Spring Valley. Morning, Shane. How are you?
Good morning, Kay. Yeah, well, thank you.
That's great. We're just going to touch today on the Bishop family's association with Spring Valley. It's something that I guess was very dear to your father's heart, and certainly something that as a family you could all be very proud of. Would you just like to take us back to the beginning of the Spring Valley story and when and where and how it started and how your dad became involved?
Yeah, no, thank you, Kay. Spring Valley was quite unique, and it was a 1,200 acre property on the Mary River, just north of Gympie, which was owned by the Sullivan family, and Addie Sullivan was one of the pioneer Brahman breeders, certainly in that area. And he was a livestock agent, and then, in later times, a Brahman breeder. He started with the Brahmins. Yeah. It was a property that was highly developed for its time. It was just way before its time. The facilities there were quite unique for that time. He was very active in the development of the Brahman breed, and really the association as a whole. The facilities there, as I said, was just way before its time. There were bull stalls, horse stalls, and very well developed. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, in the late 70s, Addie, unexpectedly passed away and left a great hole in the industry and Spring Valley itself. And in the next couple of years, the family decided to sell Spring Valley. So Endeavour Foundation, that represent the intellectually and physically disabled community, decided to buy it as a working farm, a working industry for these types of people to live and work on. And small crops were grown on the river flats, which were very fertile, and the Brahman herd was continued as Spring Valley, about 150, 200 cows from memory, a grey Brahman herd and some red cattle as well, and to breed and produce Brahman bulls.
So just on that, that would have been a fairly unique step for the Endeavour Foundation to take. It was certainly in a completely different line to what they'd previously done. Was there some connection with Spring Valley and the Endeavour Foundation, or did someone think to say to the Endeavour Foundation, this is a way forward for us and your clients? How did that association come together? Do you have any idea of that?
Yeah, I only have a little overview of that. Yep. There would be older guys around that would know a little bit more, but they basically formed a board. Yep. And that was made up of businessmen. My father was on there for the entirety, a couple of local producers, and in that board there's a guy called Nev Collins, and he was from Brisbane, and he'd had an association with Endeavour Foundation, and give or take a little detail, I think he was the mover and shaker behind them going down that track. Mm-hmm. A lot of the Endeavour Foundation was, producing all sorts of other things like toys and stuff, and they did have a small crops farm in northern Australia, but the cattle for that time was sort of one out of the box, and there was a real calling for it. It got quite popular. People booking their family members in there, and it was a real calling for it.
Yep. And so, together that board, they came together and worked out what they could do there. So at what stage did your father sort of step in and say, okay, the cattle part, and he was certainly a very well-respected cattleman and a very well-respected Brahman breeder, even right back then. What did his role play in getting that established?
Well, it just rolled on. The herd was there, and it rolled on quite easily from what I was told, because my uncle Kevin Cummings, which was my mother's brother, he'd worked there his entire life, and from about 18, and he passed away in his mid-70s. And he was Addie Sullivan's top man. Everyone remembers Kev. He was the head stockman. He showed the cattle all over Queensland in those days, and used to ride a few show jumping horses when he was younger as well, which Addie Sullivan owned. Mm-hmm. So he just rolled on to managing the herd originally, or initially in its early days. And him and Percy were best friends. They were attached to the hip most of their life. They were great mates. So it just rolled on. So Percy sort of took a lead, from what I can remember in the early days, to get Kev to keep the stud in production. Yeah. And I know as a young man, when I came home from Emerald College, I was very keen. I had a short stint at Lansfield, and I was very keen to show cattle and be involved in the stud industry. And I know, Spring Valley was always on Dad's mind. If we bought some semen for an AI program, we'd check if they wanted some. If I was showing cattle, Sandra and I showing cattle up the east coast of Australia, we always had to pull in and pick a few head up for Spring Valley. So it was always on Dad's mind. It was part of his DNA, to be honest. He just thought about it and lived for it. And so did the other board members. They'd come together, I think initially it was monthly, and then it sort of got to quarterly. Yeah. And have a plan forward, especially in the small crops area, which I would be quite shady on. I didn't have a lot to do with that. Although as a young man, about 10 years old, I used to go picking those baby tomatoes for them, a friend of mine, and I'd go down with the guys picking tomatoes. And one of the major concerns was, because these sorts of people have wonderful attitude, Kate, yes, and there's a lot to be learnt from them. They're battling in their own lives in some way, but they have a really positive outlook on life, most of them, and they're enjoying to be there. So I always remember as a kid picking tomatoes, you had to be careful that everyone stayed calm on the bus back up to the sheds, or there'd be a tomato fight break out. So at 10 years old, I was almost a team leader the couple of times I went on, keeping everyone calm, but... and they worked very hard those days. They ended up with a packing shed, and the packing shed was, it was quite a thriving industry, and they'd send all their produce down to the markets in Brisbane, obviously. So it was a revolved. In time, the clients were housed in Gympie, and in time they ended up with a couple of lodges, which I think were about 20 or 25 clients per lodge. And they had the Addie Sullivan Lodge and the Bishop Family Lodge, and they housed there, and they'd have some carers that live in and manage that side of it, and they'd house there, and it was quite a working farm and very unique.
And so over the years, your dad obviously, along with Kev, worked to bring the clients to be part of the team, in particular the stud team, and anyone who's been around for any length of time can remember your dad with the clients and encouraging them and showing them. Do you remember at what stage he decided that that was the level that they needed to get to, or was it just a gradual thing?
Well, Kate, I guess we'll heavily invested in it because I have a brother that is physically disabled. He had a motorbike accident at 16. Yep. And for the medical technology those days, he really struggled. Like, he was in hospital for a couple of years and unconscious for 8 months. So he lost a lot of ability in sort of being mobile and speaking. And yep. Although as time went on, he got better in his mind, where intellectually, he was quite sharp. Mm-hmm. It certainly left me for dead. But it was more a physical thing. So Dad really got invested in and so did my mum, my late mum, invested in that side of it, carers and disabled people in general, because Dad was also the founding chairman of Riding for Disabled in Gympie. Mm-hmm. And what they noticed, whether it was genetic or a lot of them were injuries through accidents, whether it was physically or brain injuries. People need to be stimulated. They need to have a reason to get out of bed and go do things. And they found that, you know, they were quite willing to work and got very stimulated through it. And I can remember as a young man being out of Spring Valley, there was a guy they called Rex, and he was a rodeo rider and had a bad accident and had a brain injury, and he had trouble obviously looking after himself, but he could do some things, and Kev got him back onto a horse that he was nearly the head stockman. He rode everywhere with Kev. And of course, you know, the logistics of that cater, it sounds good to have them on horses and mustering and that, but then you need, you know, it's a real work hard to have a team of horses that are suitable, and then you need enough supervisors, and,
and you know,
so it's really easy to speak about, but it was really, you know, it was a big job.
Exactly, and you know, that's I guess, you know what I mean. Your dad obviously had enough faith in the system to be able to say we can bring these people along with us, because, you know, breaking in cattle and showing cattle and preparing cattle for sales or shows, or just preparing cattle to run a commercial herd, to be able to go through a set of yards and stuff like that, is a big enough job for able-bodied people. Of, you know, so was there do you remember being part of a team that used to go to Spring Valley to help with those, you know, to you know, encourage, show, teach, mentor, whatever the words are you want to describe what happens to bring people along with you? Or did they, you know, was Kev the sole person? You know, to me it seems like it would have taken a huge team. It takes a big enough team. You feel like you need a huge team to just break in cattle when everyone can do as they're told and understands what you're telling them.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And Kev they always had, like they had a farm manager, and they always had some able-bodied staff there. I can remember a guy called Tony Fitzgerald who was born and reared at Kilkeevan. He went through Emerald College just a year before me, and he worked there for 8 or 10 years. And I think he's a current MLA board member, to be honest. He's involved in a feedlot in Texas, from memory. And he was, you know, he was a very astute young man and very capable, and a great personality for it. So him and Kev and whoever else could help, you know, would supervise all these things. And in 1986, Dad started the Garglen sale in Rockhampton at Gracemere. In 1987, he included Spring Valley in it to have some bulls, 25 bulls, and we'd always, you know, some of the clients had come, and there's two guys called Fred and Squeaky that come to handle the cattle, and they were, you know, they were great fellas, great sort of attitudes towards it. The cattle liked them. They got a knack cattle, but having said that, you know, you've got to be on your game. You've got to make sure they're not standing behind a steel gate, not holding it, and something bumps it, and all those little catchy things that you learn by the way, or two bulls start fighting, you know, you need to make sure they're out of the way. But really, really capable young fellas, and a lot of fun to be with. But just one example, you know, Fred would be quite happy for me to tell you the story. Kevy was always, you know, he was always giving them a bit of cheek because they loved it. And Fred had this beautiful red bull, and he's about the leading in the ring. And Kev said, now Fred, and of course Dave Watkins, everyone would remember the great Dave Watkins from Elvis. He was an auctioneer, and I think he really enjoyed selling the Spring Valley cattle. You know, I think he enjoyed the whole concept of it. And had a lot of, as Dave would, had a lot of passion for it. And Kev said to Fred, he said, now Fred, when you sell your bull, rip up the box and tell Dave, get your money, mate. We'll take your money home. Just joking. Fred goes, oh, Kevin, you know. Anyway, sells the bull, and back then it was $4,000 or $5,000 when that sort of bought you something. And Fred goes straight out the box and taps Dave on the shoulder. And I was actually standing beside Kevin. He said, oh, shit, Shane, I didn't think you'd do it. And Dave, you know, he fudged his way through it really well and got his wallet out, negotiated with him, and it was a couple of minutes of fun in the middle of the sale, and everyone was laughing him. And anyway, we got through that, and the sale actually picked up after that. And the bidding started, quite aggressively after that, and everyone was in a good mood.
Yeah.
So the following year, things were a bit tougher, and the sale was going a little bit steady. I remember Percy saying to Kev, "Send Fred up that box and cause a bit of a disturbance." It worked last year. So there were a lot of fun things happen, and Fred's still down at Gympie there, and I'll tell you about Mount Barley in a minute, but Fred's still down at Gympie there poking around, and he's still very good friends with Mount Barley, who also worked there for years. I think he's right in Endeavour. I think it was sort of like 35 years he's in part of Endeavour, and in cattle and small crops, and they're still... now still picks him up to this day and takes him to horse sales and things and looks after him. So, there were lifetime friendships made through that place.
Yeah, and I can remember as a younger person, Spring Valley selling here at Gracemere, and your dad would be there, and I now know Kev with them, and they it was amazing, and people, it was always a good feeling. I felt, people didn't feel sorry for them. They bought their bulls according to what they wanted, but people felt good about it when they walked out of the ring, because they just knew that the amount of excitement and pleasure that it gave to the people from Spring Valley was far more exciting than buying a bull from someone who was able-bodied and able to do it with far less work. So Spring Valley, is it still in the hands of the Endeavour Foundation?
No, it's been sold, and in the mid-90s, I think it's more like 96, 97, they decided to disperse of it, and I don't know the exact details, but it was kind of. I know Percy was very emotional and upset about it. It was kind of a decision of the government of the day that Endeavour that Spring Valley had to be sustainable financially, and that was just a ridiculous notion. Not that it made huge losses, I'd imagine, but just the whole logistics of that was stupid. It was providing such a good service.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
So they decided to disperse the Brahman herd, and they kept a small crops property down on the coast, east coast, south of Gympie, I believe, I think, and a lot of the clients moved into town, and they started this in-house care for them in houses in town. And I'm not sure that went well initially.
No.
They try and get more able-bodied guys and put them in one house together and see if they could look after themselves type thing. And, they need supervision, a lot of them, and they need direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Give them some supervision, some direction, they go great guns.
That's right.
But just going back to, the showing of cattle and people being happy to see bulls, their cattle produced and were happy to bid on them, and like you say, they didn't feel sorry for them, and it was a working Brahman stud, and they sold on their merits. But there was a lot of people donate semen and heifers, and I know Roy Summerfeld from Browra down there at Maryborough, he had a really affinity to it. He'd always make sure they had a good heifer to flush or whatever, and he was very kind, and the Fennick families, and I know Ferdinand's Brahman stud of its day, everyone was keen to make sure they had a bit of good semen or a heifer to use.
Yes, yep.
So when it came time to selling the cattle, they just sold their merits, and it was just like any other Brahman stud. But behind the scenes, late Jeff McCamley visited there quite often. Behind the scenes, everyone was very keen to see it work and be successful.
Yeah, and that. I guess that was part of the success of it, and clearly the cattle coming through the ring were of quality, and like you say, they sold on their merits. But I guess the pleasure that it gave to the clients was something that is not replicated by your staff don't get that excited when your bull sells well. They just go, oh, yeah, it's the boss's bull, and off they go. You know.
Oh, yeah.
the
I don't get excited. You go right down to the tears of their favourite animals left. And,
you know.
Those sorts of things. I thought one of the most remarkable things that I've ever seen in my life was the Brahman breed. And I guess we, you know, at some stage we've been from Sydney to Cairns, whether showing or judging cattle. It was in about 88, I think I was married in 88, I think it was the Gimme Show 88. Kev had 23 clients out of Spring Valley lead, a Spring Valley animal in the Grand Parade, Gimme. And, you know, just the logistics of that was phenomenal, because I know, you know, as a young man showing cattle in Gimme, if you won lucky enough to win a broad ribbon and had to take it in the Grand Parade, there's always a few butterflies becking through the Grand Parade, because it was quite a high pressure thing to do. And Gimme Show was a very successful and active show, so there's thousands of people there. And Kev broke all these heifers and young bulls in for these guys to lead in the Grand Parade. And I said to Sandra at the time, I said, that's probably the most amazing thing I've seen. And just looking from the outside, people won't generally understand or appreciate what just happened there. But it was a testament to Kev, but it was a testament to the cattle and the Brahmins. And I just know from my experience, you know, with Craig, our brother, Brahmins, once that you learn, get their faith and they're comfortable with you, they used to really bond with those sorts of guys, because they were so kind to them, and I believe they felt the kindness and didn't feel threatened.
No.
And I, you know, I remember being at home trying to get a cow at the crush, and she'd get a bit cranky and didn't want to go, and Craig would come along and walk through the yard, and I'd hold my breath, and she'd take absolutely no notice of him. I think, oh, well, got away with that. But she just didn't feel threatened by him, you know. And it was, you know, if you really analyse that side of it, it was quite, you know, quite amazing, to be honest.
Can you remember some of the highlights, you know, in relation to the Spring Valley sales? You know, what sort of, you know, I guess
they had a line of bulls at Rocky one year that certainly topped the Car Glen sale. They were a great line of bulls. So, you know, back in the day of 12, 15,000, which was good money.
Yes.
They had a grey boy, I just can't forget his name. I think he won the Gimpy Show, and he got reserve senior or something at the Ecker. There was a lot of success. A lot of people would call in, buy a heifer or whatever off them, but just a good line of cattle, I guess. You know, like all these things came, the real tribute to the whole thing was when they had a dispersal and people turned up in their droves and wanted to buy them. Wanted to buy them on their own merits, and sold really well. And I know Dad was quite sad about it, because he said, oh, you know, there's 50 years of breeding, and although they sold well, it was a testament of the cattle, you know, why they sold so well. So, but yeah, a lot of highlights. The guys that worked there, I know Mel Barley worked there for years. He'd tell you some amazing stories that go on, and fun stories, and they'd all enjoy it. The other side to TK that probably wants to mention is you're providing a service for people who just need a little bit of help in life.
That's right.
But also the parents.
Yes.
It was very, you know, there's a whole logistical side to being a parent. I know what my parents went through with Craig and my brother, especially when he was young and he had brain damage and the many years that it can take a brain to recover. There's a highly emotional side to that, and it's very hard on the parents and, you know, relationships and all that, everything that goes with that side of it. So it was a really good thing for the parents of these people to know that they were in a secure environment, they had purpose in their life. So, you know, there was a real side to that too, and the parents would come to the Christmas parties and you could see they were happy. You know, if you, and I know in our point of view, you know, I've got a 57-year-old brother and both my parents are gone, so other fellas take, you know, care for him and make sure he's fine, keep watch over him, and he's quite capable now. But if you had a high dependent person and you're getting older as a parent, it's a real concern to them.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I have a couple of friends who, yes, but have, you know, family who were in the Endeavour program too, and absolutely, it's a huge worry. The later years of both your life and the disabled person's life as to what's going to happen to them. Do you think, if Craig hadn't had his accident, that would have been your dad's focus? Was he always, to the uninitiated, Percy Bishop was a great man. Everyone loved I never knew anyone who had a bad word to say about him. But was that sort of do you think that was sort of the instigator of him thinking, we're not the only one in this boat, and I'd like him to remain within the rural industry, and I've got to be proactive in making people realise that these people can be part of agriculture. It's not, it's not only for the fully able-bodied.
Yeah, I think Dad would have chose that path anyway, because as you said, Dad was, he was a very loving human. Everyone loved Dad, and he loved them. I remember a young man growing up, he certainly wasn't the guy that handed out the discipline in the family when you needed it. There's a little bit soft, I thought. And he just loved people and loved cattle, and because Dad, I think Dad would have, and you can remember I was only from 8 to 10 years old when this started, but I think he would have always had an affinity with it because he loved Spring Valley. Yeah. And I used to always think our Garglen property on Stump Road, the south side, is where Dad started, because Dad started as a livestock agent and did a lot with Addie. And our place on Stump Road was a mini Spring Valley, really. We had an office similar, and our bull stalls were made similar, and because Addie was just such a leader in all things, stud cattle for that time, and I think Dad, he was really, really struggled when Addie passed. He was even though they were sort of competitors and selling bulls, they were great mates. So I think he always had an affinity with Spring Valley, and he was always kind towards the people that need a little bit of help. I know working with Dad, we had this deaf and dumb guy used to come into home all the time, and Dad didn't know any sign language, but to cut a long story short, Dad was giving him a bit of cash every week just because he lost his parents and didn't have anyone to care for him too much, and Dad said, Dad used to give him a bit of cash to sort of feed himself and stuff, and I said to Dad one day, I said, what's the go there? And he said, well, Shane, we're very fortunate and he's not, and that was sort of the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
And so he always, and I know with the guiding for disabled, Dad used to he had a couple of good old workhorses, very quiet, Oakwood bred horses, and he'd take them in, and he got a real buzz out of people having a couple of hours of fun.
Yes, yep.
And I think it really rubbed off on our children too, my brother's children and my children, to grow up in that environment, especially with Craig, because I used to always say to him, life can get a lot worse than this.
Yeah, that's right.
And so Dad always had an affinity. He was always helping somewhere because he had a huge career in pony club. Yep. He loved seeing kids develop and grow and achieve. And I know at Garglen at home we always had a student from somewhere, whether it was from a uni, a vet student, or a kid from the high school. Most weeks there was a student running around there on work experience. Yeah. And where other people might take 1 or 2 a year, we probably had 20 for them. He enjoyed that sort of thing.
You were the eternal teacher, Shane.
Yeah, what Dad was. I don't know, hopefully I taught him something, but anyway, it was good.
Yeah, no, it certainly is a great story, the Spring Valley story, and something I think that the Brahman breed can be proud of. Unfortunately, the demise of it was through the fault of anyone to do with the place, and like you say, the testament was the wonderful dispersal sale. It's certainly a void left, I think, for people who are, who come from the rural industry, who would like to stay in that industry. There is certainly limited opportunities now for them to to be taught and socialise and mix with the people of the same ilk. It's a great story, Shane. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh no, Kay. Thank you for having me on, and I just it was certainly, as I said, it was a stage for my life that it was good to watch, and I was, don't get me wrong, I wasn't overly involved in the later years, but knew a lot of the people that were, and saw a lot of the cattle, and the fun that it provided, and I guess I'd like to finish, by saying, if you do know someone that's caring for a disabled person or in any way, it's a big job. So if you can do a little bit for them, shout them a lunch, or if it's a lady, shout her up to a hairdresser or a spa or something, or help with some sort of relief. It's probably one of the most taxing things that people go through in life.
Yes.
And it was a great facility, and I hope in the future. And, we're in a stage in Australia where, workplace health and safety and all these things are verging on over the top. And Dad used to get very frustrated with, what happens if he falls off a horse? And, what happens if this happens? And Dad goes, well, what's the flip coin to that? Not having any sort of life or achievement. And,
that's right.
That's right. So with comes, and it doesn't matter what industry, with what comes with achievement sometimes can come with a little bit of a accident or the downside of it, but you can't live under those circumstances. It's good to be positive. So it was thanks for having me again. It was an absolute pleasure to talk about it.
Yes, lovely. Thanks very much. Today we've spoken with Shane Bishop, who has explained the intricacies of Spring Valley, the Brahman stud that was owned by the Endeavour Foundation. I guess, Shane, on behalf of everyone, we'd like to thank you and in particular your family for your support over the years of that endeavour, and the opportunities that it gave to people that they wouldn't have otherwise had. So thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.